Well, we're beginning a new series today, and the flesh. Doesn't that sound exciting? I've been waiting so long for this moment to say we're going to study the flesh for 4 weeks, you know. And some of you are going right now, okay, the flesh, that kind of has maybe we should have like a huge banner on the outside, just cover the whole side of the building that's got like those Abercrombie, that guy and that girl, you know, and the flesh. No, I don't think that's going to work. For some of us, the flesh, immediately when I thought of the flesh, I thought, well, there's a passage in Scripture. There's a lot of passages in Scripture about the flesh, but it kind of takes me back to, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way, but you always say that before you say something that's negative about a person. Have you ever noticed that? You always, yeah. So that disclaims that. So what I'm saying isn't negative. Thank you, Tim. But in Galatians 5, it talks about the deeds or the sins of the flesh. And Paul just lists some things out as he's talking about the flesh. And this kind of takes me back. Some of us that have been in the church for a while, you've been to places where they've talked about the flesh a lot. And I picture this preacher with a Bible maybe even bigger than mine, okay, that he reads from, and it is a he. And he says, the deeds of the flesh are evident, which are immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry. I read these fast so they don't stick, right? Idolatry and sorcery and enmities and strife and jealousy, outbursts of anger, disputes, dissensions, factions, envyings, drunkenness, carousings, and things like these. Now, my translation is rather mild there. If you happen to have a King James, I think the word licentiousness is in there. I don't know what licentiousness really means. It's in that carousings and drunkenness portion, I think. It's, let's just say, freshman college. All right? And you understand what licentiousness is getting to, okay? And we're used to hearing people talk about the flesh in that manner, and then the minister that does that goes down to the church potluck and consumes about 5,000 calories, right? As he's just preached on these specific things that are about the flesh. And we're not going to do that either. Okay? We're not going to just earmark a few things and say, these are about the flesh. The word is used in the New Testament 141 times in 118 verses. And Paul is especially fond of the term. And what he means is the physical body when he mentions the flesh. And the flesh is used in this way to describe us as being fallen and being sinful. He says in Romans 7:18, he says, nothing good dwells in me that is in my flesh. And what he's talking about is this struggle that every human being has, is that we have a battle that goes on within us, that we want things and we do things and we're attracted to things that we know are not good for us. And he terms that the flesh. Then he says, don't walk in the flesh, walk in the Spirit. And when we talk about walking in the Spirit, I found that oftentimes Christians kind of picture this as being some kind of metaphysical, non-physical walk where it's kind of transcendent and you're not aware of anything that's going on, that like supposedly that is walking in the Spirit. And that's really far from what Paul is talking about. What we learn is that the body is not evil. The body's a bridge. And sometimes God speaks to us through the body. And He tells us to use our bodies for the kingdom. God reaches us through that. But we know that it's a challenge and it's a danger. Now, today we begin this series, and I'm doing something just a little bit different. I hope you don't think that I'm making you feel juvenile in this, but some of you will grab onto this. And how many of you have memorized Scripture? Couple. Okay, some people are faithful in doing it, memorizing some scripture. Most of us know John 3:16. Are you ready to learn some more? Pastor friend of mine, Jim, as I talk about Jim a lot, Jim memorized scripture. He memorized the entire book of Luke. Took him a year, but he memorized the entire book of Luke. And he could recite the entire book of Luke. Okay? So there's, I know you're going, there's a standard that's up here, okay? So I say that to make this just a lot easier. I want to challenge you. I've got these little cards back there on the table, and we'll see who picks them up. We're watching, all right? But on the back of the flesh card, there's this passage of Scripture from Romans 12, 1 and 2. And I took it from a really easy translation. This is not the translation that I memorized years ago, so you excuse me if I don't recite this for you. But this is a really good Scripture, a really seminal core Scripture that if you're going to memorize some Scriptures, this would be one that I would say you need to put this in your memory bank. And so I made these little cards so you can put it, on your refrigerator or on your mirror. You can carry it in your purse or billfold and get that out and look at it through the day. But let's say this together, okay? And, I don't do this very much, so when I do it, I think it's important, all right? Romans 12, 1 to 2. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Isn't that a wonderful passage of Scripture? And we're going to do that every week, and really this whole series kind of comes off of that. Not being conformed to this world, learning a new way of thinking, giving ourselves, our bodies, it says, to God, which is real worship. Now, the five senses are the input system into the body. That's what we're starting today in the flesh, is the senses. And if we were a computer, this would be our keyboard and our mouse and the wireless connection and other connections that are connected to your computer. These things all put data in, and so our five senses all put data in. All the data that's in the body comes through these ports, and they are collected in the central nervous system, and they're recorded. And of course, there's millions and millions of input streams every day. And this is how we engage the world around us. And this is how the world engages us. And they're one way that God speaks to us. God has another way. But this is one primary way that God reaches us, is through our senses. In Psalm 139:14, I want to make mention of this, where the psalmist says, I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. So it's just confirmation that our created bodies are not evil. Okay, that we're made for a purpose, and this is not evil that we're talking about. This is potential for both good and evil. Most of us have had those moments when we were overcome with emotion, overwhelmed with data. Classic is, I think, the Grand Canyon. There are other marvelous things in the world, but kind of the standard for Americans is to go to the Grand Canyon, and you stand there and you look out on the Grand Canyon and you go, wow. I mean, something just kind of happens to you, or is supposed to happen, as you stand there and look at the wonder of that, And that's all coming in through our senses as God is impressing things upon us. You probably have had some others. Maybe as I had this experience years and years ago, as you look at a child's little toes or little fingernails and you go, oh my gosh. For some reason, that just strikes you as just being just fearfully, wonderfully made, just so just blows your mind, and it comes through your eyes. It's coming through your senses. Maybe you've been outside the city sometime and happened to look up in the sky and see the Milky Way. And it's strange how city dwellers, how we can forget what the whole universe looks like unless we see it on TV or something. But when you're outside and you look up and you see that and you go, oh my gosh, I'm just overwhelmed, you see. We're being reached through our senses. I've had a few steaks that did that. Leah's laughing. I remember Leah and I were in Indianapolis one time, and we were just kind of knocking around, and we both like steak. And so I said, remember this? I said, yeah. She says, yeah. I said, there's a Ruth Chris. Let's go into Ruth Chris. And we both had jeans on, really, T-shirts, just kind of shabby looking, just knocking around town. And so we went into Ruth Chris, and Ruth Chris is like, you've been to Ruth Chris? I mean, or those kind of steakhouses? Wow. A lot of money, but they just bring out a steak and potato. If you want anything else, you got to pay for it. I mean, that's it. But the steak, the first bite of the steak, I went, oh my. Oh, I was moaning and groaning, and she's, It's like, this is terrible. All other steak is ruined. Okay? So that's the taste. See how I worked that in there with all that stuff? Most of us had those moments sometime, but we don't think about it. We thrive on input from our senses, and most of the time we just can't get enough. We want to see everything and hear everything and taste most things and smell some things and touch some things, but we just want more and more stimulation through our senses. And in our really kind of a high definition world, we might be experiencing sensory overload, where we're just getting so much data in at once. And it's just almost becoming normal. TV down in our basement's an old TV, 25-inch tube TV, and when I'm relegated to watching something down there and you look at the TV and you go, what's wrong with them? It's not high def. I mean, what's wrong with why are they so blurry, Hit on the thing, shake it a little bit. What's wrong with this? We're just used to seeing the blemishes on people's faces now because everything has to be in high definition. We have this desire for our senses to just want more and more sensory input, into our lives. And, we go to a restaurant and they've got like 20 TVs watching 8 games. We try to watch all 8 of them, right? We try to look around, keep track of it while we're on our phone, trying to talk to our people, right? I see guys all the time and girls with one earbud in. They got one earbud in so they can listen to the music because they can't stop while their phones are around their neck because they can't stop doing that because we want more and more sensory input. You know that there's a clinical term for the confusion and the disorientation that's caused by so much sensory overload, and that's what it's called, a sensory overload. It's a factor in autism. Autistic people pay attention to their senses as it's coming in. So while we may not pay attention to all the input that they're getting in, they're paying attention to it, and there's just so much they just can't handle. If we were paying attention, we couldn't handle it either. I understand that in clinical situations in the ER and places like that, now they call that sensory overload when a person that works there for so long after receiving all this stimulation that they get constantly, for now 12-hour shifts in an ER, that sometimes they become confused and they start having hallucinations because they're just overloaded with so much stuff. But for the most part, we're just really, kind of unaware. And for many of us today, we just want more and more visuals, more sound, more input. I understand that there's a Korean company that's installing $2 million systems in American theaters. And these are systems that are going to shake your seat and bump your seat with the movie. There's smell-o-vision. There's going to be, when there's flowers, you're going to smell the flowers. There's fake wind and all that kind of stuff that's going on. It's going to cost you another $8. As you're sitting there with your 3D glasses on, Okay, as you're in it, you're going to smell it, you're going to shake with it, and all that kind of stuff. 200 theaters are going to do this. So that's coming soon. That's going to be your next experience. Those of us that desire more and more. I'll make you a deal right now. If you'll just give me the $8, I'll go with you. I'll bang your seat every once in a while. There'll be some smells, some other stuff that's going on. But I'll be willing to do that for you. You don't have to go to one of those theaters. We can do that right now. My point is that our senses are a doorway. Our senses are the window or the entranceway into ourselves. And the greatest input comes from our eyes and our ears, and that's where we want to specifically focus on this morning. And in our world, we are probably overstimulated. And this makes us insensitive to the impact of what's coming in. Let me say that one more time. In our world, we're probably overstimulated, and that makes us insensitive to the impact of what we are receiving. You hear, garbage in, garbage out. I say it's garbage in, garbage pile is what this is. Most people think that they see and hear, and it has very little effect on them. In fact, we think that we can handle it, right? We hear this all the time. I say this all the time. Well, I saw that, and the language was really bad, but the movie was really good. And so I just kind of blocked out the language because the movie was fantastic and the visuals in it were great and the stunts were good or the storyline was fantastic. And the language was probably pretty realistic with what real life would be. I got to thinking about this week as I've been preparing for this. If my friends talked like that, some of the things that we tolerate in movies, like 70 F-bombs in one movie, and we go to it and we go, it's a good movie. I can see why it's going to get an Academy Award. If our friends talk like that, would we sit and listen to our friends talk like that? There's no way. But you see, we think, well, I can handle it. It doesn't bother me. It's not real. I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the series when we talk about the mind and the heart. Let's look at one scripture that Jesus he talks from Matthew 6:22-23. This is right there in the Sermon on the Mount is the context of this. And in the context, he's talking about in this world and the mammon and the division in this world. And I think that he's talking specifically to this subject. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. Therefore, if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how terrible that darkness will be. It says, your eye is the lamp. This is the light. This is the entryway into yourself, is through your eye. It says what we watch, what we take in affects our entire body. Is he wrong? I've said he's wrong before. I said, no, it didn't have any effect on me at all. That's what I've said. I'm just saying Jesus is wrong. That's what I've been saying to that. Has he seen our choices? Has Jesus seen American TV? Has he seen what's in the theaters? No, he knows how we're made. It says he walked in the flesh. He was in the body. He knew the impact of what comes through the senses. He says your eye is the entryway here. He says be careful. You're putting darkness into your life. Well, right about now, some of you are thinking, Don's kind of gone off judgmental today. He's waning Baptist on us, Listen, I'm not trying to make us feel guilty. We do that enough on our own. You don't need me to make you feel guilty. I've had one of these people in every church that I've served who at the door would say, "Oh, preacher, you're preaching today. You stepped all over my toes." Like that is my purpose, is to come here and step on your toes. If I wanted to step on our toes, I could do a lot better job than what I'm doing at doing that. But some people think that that's the value of preaching, is to make you feel bad when you go to church. I don't believe that. So, again, that's a disclaimer that if they're feeling bad right now and you think I'm being judgmental, that's really not my intention. I just don't think that we can look at everything that comes into our lives and not have it affect us in some way. And that's what Jesus is saying. I don't think we can listen to everything that's out there and still have a life that's based in contentment and peace. The winters get kind of long, and last couple winters with Netflix now in our home, Nina and I have taken upon ourselves to watch some kind of mini-series that's on Netflix because we don't have, Showtime or HBO. Only sinners have Showtime and HBO. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, we don't have that. So we watch the stuff that's on Showtime and HBO when it comes on Netflix because that's okay, right? No. But it gets dark at 5:30 and you eat dinner at 6 or whatever, and then there you are. So we've been watching the last couple of years. We watched some of these miniseries, and they're very well done. And last winter, we started one that was about this prison, and it was pretty good, but it was 46 episodes long and something like that. And 80, it was 80. It seemed like 80, but it was really, really long, and we were like, okay, well, we can do this with competitive watching, so we can finish this whole series, and you got to set these goals for yourself in life. So this is what we're going to finish: is we're going to watch all this series. Make a long story short, it was a pretty good series, and it didn't have any what I would say gratuitous violence. They didn't throw violence in just because they wanted violence. It was just naturally violent all the way through it. And as a result of this, it took me a while to realize it, but I started having bad nightmares. And the nightmares weren't like, oh no, I'm going to school and I can't find my homework kind of nightmares. The nightmares were really graphic, violent nightmares like I'd never had before. And it really started kind of affecting our sleep patterns. And I was a little slow in realizing, I finally said, man, I don't know where these things are coming from because I've never had stuff like this. And it was either that little small voice or Nina, I can't remember which one it was, but said, it's what you're putting in. It's what you've been watching. And as, we were just about done, and as that whole thing waned, they've reduced. But I realized that there's a cause and effect here, that just because I say, oh, I know it's just a show, I know it's entertaining, doesn't mean that it doesn't affect me. So the choice is before us. Do we want nightmares or dreams? Do we want fear, or do we want hope? Do we want contentment, or do we want insatiable desire? Do we want anger or mercy? I think it begins with what we hear and what we see. The garbage just kind of builds up, It isn't that we have this law that says, oh, if you watch an R-rated TV show or an R-rated movie that you're just going to hell. That's not the whole issue at all. The issue is that, does it have an effect upon us? Every instruction that's in the Bible is not there to see if we can pass or fail it. But the instructions that are in the Bible are there to give us good health, to give us spiritual wellness, to keep us safe. Now, I have a theory as to why we think that we can put up what is obviously garbage into ourselves and not have it harm us. The most common reason given is that I can handle it. I'm an adult. I know that it's not real. It doesn't affect me because I know that it's not real and what isn't, and I can sort it out. That's biologically false. I've read a number of good books on the brain. I'm reading another one right now on the brain. And we're just discovering so much about the human anatomy of what the brain does. And that's biologically false. Most of our exposure and intake is not of a logical nature, but it's of an emotional nature on entertainment. Most of it is an emotional stimulus. that comes to us. The guy running through the house with a mask on and a chainsaw chasing the young girl, that is not a logical input that comes into our brains. That is an emotional input that comes in there. You understand where I'm going with this. You're supposed to be terrified. And that stimulus is recorded in the base of our brains, and that part of our brain that receives the emotional and carries the emotional input in our brains. And then we have the cervical cortex in our brain. We think that we're all moving off of this part of, in the logic area of our brain. Very little of what we do actually comes from this. I've always suspected that, but it's proved to be true. These two lobes are connected. There's stimulus that runs from what we receive as emotions into the logic. Only the problem is that it's not a two-way street on these connectors. They're one-way circuits. There are 10 times as many circuits running from the emotions to the logic part of the brain than what there are running from the logic back to the emotions. So we think, well, I'm going to overcome this emotion with logic. Well, the chances are 1 in 10 that you're going to do that. Chances are 9 out of 10 that the emotions are going to drive what you do in your life. So when we see something that emotionally impacts us, which is what most of our entertainment does today, we're going, I can handle this because I'm logically going to overcome that. The chances are really, really slim that you're going to do that. You understand that? We're much more emotional creatures than we want to believe that we are. But the primary reason why we think that we can take it in with our senses is insignificant and it doesn't hurt is this myth that we are made up of compartments. That we say, well, I'm going to store that over there in that entertainment compartment. I'm going to store that over there in that music compartment. Where those words that they say those aren't really words that mean anything to me. So I put it over there in that entertainment or that music compartment. And we think that we are made up with different sections in us that hold different things, when actually we're a unity. And I've got a picture of an orange, and this is the way that we normally think that we're made, is we've got these little sections in us, and some of it is for thinking, and some of it's for feeling, and some of it is for entertainment, and some of it's for God, and some of it is for family, and some of it's for work, and kind of compartmentalized person is the way that we think of ourselves. Now, we may not logically say, yes, that's the way I think I'm made, but most of us live that way, as if, well, this doesn't really matter because it's going in this section over here, and that section has special immunity. That section doesn't affect the rest of me. When in reality, we're really more like chocolate milk. This is the way we really are. We have a unity about ourselves, and our body affects our mind, our body affects our soul, and vice versa. We can't put something in our brain and not have it affect the rest of us. And we are more unified, like chocolate mixed into milk, than what we are like an orange. I think we can remember that. The problem is that oftentimes we live as if we'll accept chunky chocolate milk. Like there's some stuff that's been thrown down in the bottom of that chocolate milk, and well, it doesn't really hurt anything in there. Really? Did you ever eat chocolate or drink chocolate milk after you're a kid? It's not, and it's not a good thing to do. That's right. We know better than that. At least now you have those sippy cups that kind of strain out the big things, right? But you don't want to do that. We are in charge of the filter. Paul was trying to explain this to the church at Corinth, how to live in this world and not be of the world, and he taught them about their consumption and the limits of their liberty. 1 Corinthians 10:23, he says, all things are lawful, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful, but not all things edify. And specifically what he was talking to them about was the challenge that the Corinthians had with buying meat in the market. And there's a lot there in 1 Corinthians as to how to live in this world. We think that we have a culture that is really testing us, but nothing like the Corinthians. And he tells them, he says, you've got liberty in everything, but just because you've got liberty doesn't mean that everything that you're going to do is going to be good for you. Not everything is going to be healthy for you. And not everything is going to edify or build you up. Some of these things that you're doing in liberty are going to tear you down. So he says, sort it out. Put the filter on. It's your life. It's your mind. It's your heart. If you want to fill yourself up with garbage, then you're going to get some serious digestion, or it's going to start stinking in there. But you are the one that's in control of this. You're living in what's often called a fallen world, where there's sin, and it's going to affect you if you don't filter yourself. The world is toxic. And Paul doesn't say, well, if you defile yourself, if you do some of these things, then you're going to hell. You're just kicked out of the church, and that's all that there is to it. No, he says, no, if you do some of these things, he says, it's not wise. You're going to hurt yourself. And you're obviously going to hurt some other people in that, but you've got to decide. I think we have a very difficult walk today. It's probably not more difficult than what the church has experienced before. Much of what we see on TV and in the media would have been considered to be just downright filthy 20 years ago. That's the reality. Most of you were children then. But 20 years ago, what we have on the TV today would have been absolutely shocking and considered to be vile and filthy. And yet as time goes by, it becomes more and more normal. Just because it's become accepted doesn't mean that it's not harmful. Maybe the garbage is getting so high inside that we just can't smell it anymore. Maybe we've gotten used to the garbage. And we can get angry at the media all that we want. We can complain about the decline of America. But we are in charge of the input to ourselves. No one else is. That's up to me. Matthew 5:27-29, Jesus says some more about the filtering process. He says, you have heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. I say to you that every man who looks at a woman lustfully, do you see that, the eyes? Looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. Then Jesus gives a really hard statement, not literally, obviously, although, some have mistakenly thought so. He says, if your right eye causes you to fall into sin, tear it out, throw it away. It's better for you to lose a part of your body than your whole body be thrown into hell. So if you're doing something that's a problem to you, it's up to us to avoid it. He says, you pluck out the eye. He goes on to say, cut off the hand is the next verse that he uses. He doesn't say, well, if you don't stop watching that stuff, then I'm going to take your sight away. No, he says, no, this is your thing. You have the freedom, you have the liberty, but you need to be the watchguard over yourself. You must understand what's at stake here. This is important. Well, I want to leave us with a question to think about for a minute. Most of us, I myself included, I hear this kind of stuff and I get defensive, right? We immediately begin to think, I wonder what he's talking about. I wonder what he knows about me, right? I wonder exactly what show he's making reference to, or did he see something I posted and he's making reference to that, and we get defensive about it, and that's not my point at all, and that's not going to help anything at all to get defensive about it or wonder specifically what I'm talking about, because this comes down to each individual. Now, obviously, we have some moral standard, some accepted community practices that you have in a church, where if a person broke those standards, we would say, I think that you need to consider doing something differently. But for the most part, it's each person. So here's what I want you to ponder. And this is what hit me in my preparation up to this series for the last couple of months. Do you hear the voice of God? That's what I want to ask yourself today. Do you hear the voice of God? Have you heard that still small voice? Remember, God doesn't shout at us. God doesn't scream at us. But God has a still, small, gentle voice. God comes to us as a gentle person, as a gentleman, and He speaks kindly to us. For us to hear that voice, there can't be a whole lot of noise that's going on in here. And, I use this for myself. Don, are you hearing God's voice as much as what you did a year ago? Or I could go 10 years ago. What's changed? Has God changed? Is God's desire to speak to me any less than what it was back then? And some of you are saying, no, Don, I think that I'm hearing God's voice now. Well, good. That's great. That's fantastic. You're already, you could preach this sermon. Okay? But if we want to be in communion with God, we must, listen to His voice. We must be able to understand what He's talking to us. And the amount of garbage that we put in our lives really affects this severely, as we are overloading our senses with so much of this stuff. The ability to hear, I think, is impeded greatly by noise. So this is our thermometer. God, am I having difficulty listening to you? God, am I hearing clearly? Is my discernment, Lord, is my discernment there today, or am I unable to know? Am I confused? If I'm more confused than what I've been confused in the past, then I think the place to go is to look right here at our filters of just how much are we putting in to these brains and to these systems of ours. Let's sit with a minute for that.